If you tune in to CBC's Cross Country Checkup on a Sunday, you will hear Newfoundland native Rex Murphy take the pulse of the nation on a variety of topics. Murphy is the quick-witted, inquisitive writer, broadcaster, academic who asks the tough and some of the easy questions about everything from the Tea Partiers to trade with China. It is my pleasure to welcome CBC political commentator Rex Murphy back to Studio 4 to tell us more.
It is a cheer to be back here.
Nice to see you again. So the pulse of the nation, I heard...
Does it have a pulse?
Well, I heard you taking it on Sunday, talking about the move west. People are coming west.
Very much so.
To find success, and of course the China...
the China trip.
Trade trip.
There has been a decided tilt, and I don't think the awareness of how much industry, and I use that in the most general sense, not just corporations doing things, but the power of motion and the idea of great initiatives. The Alberta, British Columbia, and in their, by the way, in their cooperations, their links to Asia, this has become, in the span of my ridiculous journalistic career, this has become a different Canada. And the census is only the kind of icing on the cake. The economic, political, and to some degree, even the intellectual dynamics of the country are being more shaped now by, I think, Alberta, say BC, the Prairie Wing, than they are by the great designated zone of central Canada. It is a new thing.
And more going to Alberta than any other province, I think.
Well, certainly.
Was that what the census said?
Certainly more, absolutely. I mean, my own province of Newfoundland, even with St. John's being a local magnet, taking a lot of the small towns, people are going into St. John's. Since the collapse of the fisheries in the early 90s, I expect we've got another province in Alberta. We just haven't called it Newfoundland and Labrador yet. It's been an immense thing. I mean, we must have 20 or 30,000 people.
I said in the introduction that you did not hear. Harper's trade mission was about more than pandas and ping pong. Although pandas are important, an important symbolic gesture.
Pandas
apparently.
are the Lindsay Lohan of international diplomacy.
Really?
That's what pandas are.
Can I use that line?
It is all yours now.
Okay. So what does this mean to us, to you and me, Harper in China, business leaders in China, actually doing deals, it seemed?
It's very, very interesting. If you were going back 20, 30 years, I hate to put things in context, but let's go there. When Canadian nationalism had a much sharper edge, the idea that we leaned heavily on the United States, or that any of our prime ministers even had a personal relationship with the president, was not only frowned upon, it was a kind of anathema. And then you remember in the late 90s, Jean Chrétien was going to China more often than I go out to get donuts. And it wasn't really all that big a thing. Harper, in this particular context, is doing two things. 30 years ago, he would have been applauded that we are unhooking ourselves or decoupling from the great American empire and seeking alternate places. But in this particular case, the move to China is also a very particular one. Obama, for reasons of his own and his own election, he has a hard left-wing crowd that are wedded to environmentalism with something like lust. He has to satisfy them somehow. So he delayed that pipeline. And Harper is playing, for the first time in my memory, really hard politics with the United States administration. He did say, well, if you're not going to take it, we'll go somewhere else. And not only was it said, within a month, he's actually over in China doing this thing. Now, whether you think it's good or bad, and whether you think it might kind of amputate our stand on human rights is another thing. But the politics with the States is very heavy.
How dangerous is it to give up the old mayor across the 49th for China?
Well,
and I don't mean Canada's giving up the United States trade-wise, but they're sending a very strong message.
Well, that's it. Again, if it were 30 years ago, we would have had applause from all of the great Canadian nationalist institutions, NGOs, and private figures. This is the kind of thing that, again, 30 years ago would have been cheered by all. In this current context, it's funny that after the Liberals made such busy efforts to build a relationship with China, that there is a shadow of some serious criticism. It is good to divert at least some of the relationship from the States to elsewhere, whether it be China, Africa, or Australia, I don't know which, but we can't have 70% of all of our stuff more or less contingent on the whims of an ever-changing White House.
And we'll talk about that, but also back to China, the human rights issue. He mentioned it. I doubt he explored it much, but to trade with a nation that has serious human rights
Which
issues.
nation of 2/3 of the world do not have them? We should not be receiving. I mean, if you are, I am not only sympathetic, I respect the moral code, and if you elevate the moral code beyond trade and everything, fine for you. But I'll ask it again, take 2/3 of the nations of the world, if you were going to exercise a true moral code, you wouldn't have anything to do with them either.
How much attention do you think Washington is paying to Harper in China? We're paying close attention. How much attention is Washington playing on the heels of no Keystone?
I think a lot more than they're accustomed to have paid. In the old days, the thing was correct, that we were either an afterthought or a footnote on a book that they never opened. This particular one, because it goes directly to the Obama gesture about the pipeline, we will defer for a year. The fact that it had public statement, well, if you don't want it, I am going to go somewhere else. And finally, it's not Australia or it's not England, France, or Italy. It is China, the emerging superpower. They're paying a lot of attention to that. When Newt Gingrich, of all the volatile elements in the political universe, when Newt Gingrich thinks it's helpful in his campaign to signal Stephen Harper, don't go to China, they're paying attention.
Newt's always paying attention, sort of.
To Newt.
To Newt. And he tweeted today that he is going to take Callista, his current wife, out for Valentine's. Finally, they'll have some private time, so that was very important.
Well, I think it's very appropriate that the current wife gets to go for Valentine's.
Exactly.
As opposed to the other ones.
Did it surprise you, or has it surprised you so far, that the U.S. press particularly is not paying close attention to the private lives of the GOP candidates?
It could be because, it's, let's say in the case of Mr. Romney, if you were to pay attention to it, you would end up in coma. It could be because so many of them are so boring. Now, Newt's is not boring, but Newt, you see, is in the position of having put that play on Broadway before. We've had Newt Gingrich at the tail end of Clinton. Newt, in the sense, is tired gossip. That's not as good as new gossip. And in the other one, Rick Santorum is never really going to make the pages of the gossip magazines in any full-fleshed way. I don't think so, no.
But he certainly made the gay websites. They're using him as a verb or something. And Santorum, according to the latest Daily Beast, is tied with Romney. I don't know about that.
I'm not sure if he's tied or even may have jumped ahead. What it does tell you, the whole thing, not just Santorum and Gingrich or Santorum and Romney, since this thing has began. I mean, Herman Cain, I enjoyed him. I think he's a fine, fluent, demotic talker, and I like those types. But the idea that Herman Cain, who was basically out having a good time for 2 weeks, should have become the president is lunatic. And you had a succession of various people filling the slot. What this tells you about the Republican campaign, and I'm sympathetic to pushing Obama aside, what it tells you about the Republican campaign, this is the second stringers, big party. There's no one there that has either the charisma, the intellectual stature, or the personal appeal that really can run a campaign when the president is extremely vulnerable.
My friend said, it's a grand old party indeed if you are a Democrat, because this current race is a gift to President Obama, who you suggest is in a bit of trouble.
In any other context, the economic news that is there, the racking up of deficits that are using numbers that before were confined to astronomy would mean that Obama has lost. The only genius in this campaign to re-elect him is the Republican effort.
Well, financial collapse, recession, huge fiscal deficit given to Obama by President Bush, all of that. And then that health care reform, like very quickly, America on red alert. Being from there, I know what they think.
And
We're all communists.
And the Catholic Church going on as of the last week or so. He's doing everything he can to lose, but as I'll go back to the point, the Republicans really have such a scattered field, such a lack of depth and seriousness, that even at a time when he should be, by a puff of wind, pushed from office, he has a very good chance of staying.
Romney is not a mediocre businessman by any stretch, but he just can't hit the note.
He can't hit the. He has the charisma of a stack of cardboard. He has in his own state Romneycare, which steals the biggest issue that he would attack Obama on, Obamacare. I understand he's made some sort of religious compromise that parallels Obama's efforts with contraception in religious institutions. In other words, even with the success of his business career, this guy brings into play, on his side of the agenda, the two issues that everybody else could use against Obama. it makes no logical or political sense.
Yet, as you look at it, God and country, Mormon, made in America religion.
Yep.
Great-looking kids, smart
Oh,
wife.
he looks the part.
He looks
He
the
really
part.
does.
In this age of austerity, a new book out by Thomas Edsall, the political scientist, called The Age of Austerity, How Scarcity Remakes American Politics. And it's an interesting concept that because of this, everybody's being conservative or worried about, austerity. We have to pull back, we have to get jobs.
Everything is
We're
diminishing.
in a mess, everything's diminishing.
That's right.
How is it remaking politics? I don't know. I have to read the book, but...
Well, I would say that it has two focuses. Not the book, because I haven't read it either, but when we, meaning in Canada and North America particularly, to a degree even Europe, but especially us here in North America, look around you. The word austerity has a different meaning on this continent than the word austerity has in Europe. It certainly has a vastly different meaning when we start talking about austerity, India's and China's, even with China growing as it is. We have been in the flush of such surplus and such invention and such industry. The last 50 or 60 years in North America, we have peaked to such a point. Our idea of austerity is cutting entitlements that other people have yet to dream about. So austerity in our context, I would really, really narrow the word down to understand it. It's an austerity of those who are extremely, by any standard, extremely well off. And the other parts of the globe, if you get really, really hit, then it's a matter of life and death, and it's a matter of famines and population suffering, natural disasters. There are two politics going on in the world. One of these days, they're actually going to collide. The great want of the majority part of the world and the great surplus of our part. No politician is dealing with that, but again, that's far, far too long.
The rich and the poor. The blessed and the not so blessed.
Well, again, even this inequality crusade that we've seen in North America, even that's ludicrous. Because in North America, if we want to use 99%, the 99% are the 1% of the globe. There's no one even in Bonavista, Vista, Newfoundland, that isn't one of the 1% of this earth, if we're playing that game. But this is within our own, we're so extremely well off. Now let's see the best of us and the worst of us. The comparison is morally inane. It is a comparison globally that we should be making. And if we have enough to have the resources of vast numbers of hospitals, and there's still children on the face of the earth who can't get a glass of water, there's an inequality to talk about.
Yes, or a hot meal at lunch in the schools.
Exactly.
And back to the China issue for a moment, because it was about trade and a possible trade agreement, but it's also about education and immigration and other things. What can China learn from us about our healthcare system?
Well, I think it's a learning two-way street. Some of the industry that we, meaning the North Americans again, I'm going back to, go back to my own situation in Newfoundland, when we were really poor off in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. There was no shortage of one thing, no shortage of that thrust and boost to do things, to even if it was a very little capacity, what capacity you had, you brought into play. You never submitted to external misfortune if you could fight it at all. And I think when I see either people that are immigrants from China or from Africa, Toronto's a busy place, or from anywhere, it is the ferocity of their dedication to doing what they do. The family that I know, I won't be too particular, family that are running a really small shop. I guess they're making $26,000 a year. They're working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. They have 2 children. This is a ferocious love to take care of these two, manifesting itself in work. We should look at the nations that are emerging and start to study their character as much as their economics or their politics.
It's the most important thing, I would suggest.
I have none.
The character, but we don't know for sure. Rex Murphy, our guest, will come back.